Ready?
Yep.
Hey everyone, this is Ricky Grove, and you are listening to the And Now for Something Completely Machinima podcast for August 2022. I'm here with Tracy Harwood, one of our regulars. Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
And Damien Valentine, also one of our regulars and a great commentator on the news and films. Hello, sir.
Hello there.
Phil is busy throwing up in the some bathroom in Florida, so he won't be here. We told him we wanted him to use his cell phone to participate, but he just, he threw up on the cell phone, and now that doesn't work. So we're just left hanging here. But get well soon, Phil. We are going to include your excellent film choice for this month. But this first section is going to be our Machinima news section. And I think Tracy has some feedback to deal with first, and then she'll go into her news, then Damien, and then our news. Now, remember, all of the news that we're talking about is related to Machinima in some way or real-time filmmaking. So Tracy, take it away.
Absolutely. Well, we've had some really great feedback again this month. Thanks to everyone that's giving us some words of wisdom from their perspective. I'll start with Mike Clements. Mike has asked, well, this is a biggie really, but Mike has asked us, what is our favorite, greatest all-time machinima? He wants to know, what is the Citizen Kane or Terminator 2 of machinima? And the other thing he said is he really appreciates Ben's machinima history videos, particularly the Quake one that he spent some time looking at. So thanks for those comments. I think, personally speaking, from my point of view, there are just too many great machinima films that we've seen over the years to call it, in my view. I think our whole podcast is full of some great examples of the literally tens of thousands of films that creators have made over the years, demonstrating many different styles and tools and environments and approaches. And what I particularly love about it is that creative diversity that we are finding in the work. That's my favorite part of it, really. And so perhaps that question is something that we might throw back at you guys, our listeners, and perhaps as a thread on the Discord server that we've got. What do you guys think?
I think that's a great idea. The idea of the greatest or the top 10, they're popular tools for getting information out there, but they aren't necessarily reliable because a great deal of it has to do on personal preference. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're a person who just loves strange and experimental films, you're not going to like the sentimental films of Frank Capra, you know what I mean? Or stuff that it's in that vein. By the same token, if you're somebody who loves the mainstream stuff, you're just going to scratch your head over experimental work. So it really is a personal choice. I was thinking about the question and I just didn't want to answer it, but it's stayed around in my head for some time. And I think what came up in my mind over and over again was a machinima film called The Snow Witch.
Oh, yeah.
Which just, there's just something about it that made me feel so great. And I think is such a representative of the two sides of machinima, which is the sort of rough and ready side, meaning that you make it fast. You don't spend a year putting it together, but also there's a good amount of craft to it. So it looks good. It has great quality, has something to say, for one thing, because it's based on a great Japanese myth or folklore. And the director, who's, oh boy, I'm going to embarrass myself.
Is it Michelle?
Michelle, yes. She worked Britannica Productions.
That's it.
She worked for maybe 3 or 4 years and then sort of slid away into other things that she was interested in. But I think if I had a film that I could show somebody who doesn't know anything about machinima, I would choose that film.
What about you, Damien?
Yeah, I don't think I can choose one film either, because even not my taste in favorite film, just any kind of film, not just machinima, that changes every day as well, because So
Yeah.
well, how can I pick a favorite Machinima film when I can't even pick my favorite TV series? Or it just varies depending on what I feel like watching.
Yeah.
Buffy.
That is a
Yeah.
good choice. That is.
I didn't say
that is-
anything.
Well, it is a good choice, actually. I mean, yeah, there's so many from those kind of early days that pushed the boundaries. But I remember that one. I remember showing that at the European Machinima Festival back in 2007 with BBC in the audience, and they were fascinated by that.
Wow.
And that kicked off a whole sort of let's come and talk to you about Machinima kind of discussion, specifically in relation to the Snow Witch film. It was beautifully voiced, and you know the
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
story was really well told on that.
Everything about it just works, you know.
It did, yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that takes the lie out of people saying, well, Machinima is just a cheap, you know, it's really just to sketch out an idea, you know, as opposed to truly being a legitimate film on its own.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm really glad to see that.
We did a real deep dive into that several months ago. I'll have to put a link in the show notes to that, so you can go back and listen to what we had to say about it way back when, Mike. Then just picking up on some other comments that Mike made last month on the films episode. If you remember, we talked about why do people recreate scenes from big budget films,
Right.
in reference to that sort of parody Machinima of the opening scene of Top Gun Maverick,
Right.
which we reviewed by Phenom. Well, Mike says it's perhaps a bit like practicing on an instrument, and found Phil's point about how it's through recreating the works that we can uncover the why, the process, and the language of cinematography. And I think, yeah, we pretty much all agreed on that point in the end. So great observations. Pity Phil's not here to sort of pick up on that as well.
Yeah, well, he's throwing up.
Literally. Yeah.
Too much flying jets for him.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. 3D Chick also picks up on a similar point, saying that Phil was spot on from her perspective. It's all about learning the software, trying to recreate something very specific that she likes and can learn from. And that also helps her to keep focused. And then she also comments, though, that the person who's doing animation in Unreal and iClone and would like to someday make money from it, doing something that is trending is going to get more views on YouTube. She says the algorithm will show that to more eyeballs, which is also a reason so many do tutorials, because they're searchable and get more attention and viewer retention rather than the miscellaneous animations. And I get that. I have to say I do get that, but it's also,
True.
in my view, a kind of a lazy approach to it too. For me, that
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. An alternative way of looking at it is that the thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who are going to do that to bring views to their YouTube channel. There are going to be people out there who go, I don't want to watch that. I want to watch something different. And if you do something that's more creative, like come up with your own original scene, or choose something from a short story, or redo a public domain stuff that people don't know about, and then really add your own personal flair to it, you can benefit by learning the craft while you're also being creative as well. So I think that's another perspective we need to include in the conversation.
Yeah, good points actually, Ricky.
Yeah,
and then on the go on, sorry.
I just basically agree with Ricky. Is we don't want to just recreate big budget TV shows and films, because we can just watch those anyway. We don't want to, I mean, if it's really well done recreation, that's great, but we'd like to see new stuff as well. In fact, we prefer to see new stuff, but you know, I can understand why it's important to learn, and sometimes that is a good way to learn. Is I want to recreate this scene because I don't know how to make the engine do this thing, but if I try and recreate it as close as possible, I will learn how to do it, and then I can take that knowledge and then go and create my own thing.
Exactly. Very good point.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then on the films themselves that we reviewed, we've heard back from 3 of the creators, which is great. So thanks for that. Firstly, EE Studios has been in touch to shed light on some of their approach to humor, which we picked up on, if you can say that. You know, we had some observations about the crudeness of the humor,
Right.
but they enjoyed our review nonetheless. And they say what they try to do is capture as much of the truth of any group they can in the moment, so that there are bits that happen organically, which they then try to build on. And then, if you remember, we also had some comments about the facial animations, which were a little bit variable. And they say that the game tech, from their perspective, is still very buggy and often works against them, especially since they're not using expensive cameras, but that the facial recognition itself is pretty good, given the current parameters that they're working with, which I think is really interesting. And then they've also recommended that we have a look at another one of their series called Overclock, which we are going to get around to doing. So thanks for that recommendation.
Yeah, it's important to keep in mind that oftentimes our criticism is based on sometimes an ideal version of the film. So if there's a weakness in a particular aspect of a Machinima film, we can say, well, that's a weakness. But I think that's a good thing to remember, that sometimes it's the limitations of the game engine that make it a weakness, not so much that they don't have the craft to fix that. So I think that's a good point. Thank you very much for raising that up in your feedback.
Absolutely. And then JSFilmz has come back to us and commented on the film that we reviewed there, that it took him a really long time re-rendering the scene to find the brightness. And if you recall, what we said was it was too dark. But Jay says, whilst he liked its darkness, he probably agrees with us that it was possibly too dark for daytime viewing. So yeah, indeed. And then TMC also enjoyed our review of their film Hired Steel. And they're currently working on the next episode and wanted to say that their content is actually completely 3D rendered in Blender and other software suites.
Wow, that's cool.
Absolutely. They say they texture, light, animate, and render everything themselves and extract the models from the game and then rework them with permission, which I have to say is interesting, which is how the project is connected to the game. So it's a really interesting workflow there, and thanks for telling us about that.
That would be a really interesting workflow to examine, to have somebody. We should consider talking to them sometime in the future.
Absolutely. So if you're up for an interview, we'd love to talk to you about that. And then a couple of folks have also picked up on some of the things we highlighted in last month's news episode, notably the use of characters that look like real people and the potential ways that some of the latest technologies we're talking about are going to exacerbate the issues we talked about. Basically, that's using people's visual identity as assets with questionable permission to do so. And to that, 3D Chick says, well, when Reallusion came out with Headshot, she said she was stunned to see the model they were using to demonstrate it. It was a real person, a model in New York, and still wonders if they paid the model or just found the image online. And then combining that with the VTuber tech that we talked about, feels it's just going to be a recipe for all sorts of trouble. I guess one of the ways these organizations can assure everyone is to make sure that the credits are very clear. But I think it's something that just doesn't seem to happen routinely yet in this arena. It's something we've commented quite a lot on over a period of time. And then Lord Krit on our Discord server also comments on how VTuber technology is advancing, which is clearly becoming quite an alternative for webcamming streamers, he says. Chris Newell commented on our April Films episode, that was episode 35, and wanted to highlight the role that TMO and TMU played in bringing Machinima to the fore all those years ago, with a show that covered every tool there was, from Second Life to iClone and Movie Storm and so on, showing people how you could make a movie with game software and how that in turn stimulated a lot of creativity. I think we'd all say hear, hear to that.
Yeah.
Yes, hear, hear.
And finally, 3D Chick says she loves our long episodes and wishes we could manage 2 a month. Although she says she realizes we all have lives. Thank you. so nice, kind words. Appreciate that.
I'm really glad you enjoyed listening to us.
Yes. Absolutely. I think we excelled ourselves last month. We commented that somebody said, can you cut it down to 15 minutes? And we ended up doing an hour and 20 minutes or something. Which is Us
I was-
just running
I was-
wild.
I was editing that and I was going through it. I thought, I can't cut this bit out, it's too good. Can't cut this bit out, it's too good. And then in the end, I didn't cut anything out because it's just the conversation was, you can't just do it because you
Just
miss
go with it.
out. So yeah.
But we do chapter it up or chunk it up. So that's the beauty of YouTube.
Good.
I think you can kind of
Yeah.
cut and dice it and what have you. Anyway.
Right.
So I would just say keep those comments coming because we love hearing what you've got to say about what we're talking
It
about.
gives us fuel to keep doing this and enthusiasm and inspiration. Thank you.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'd say is if you spot anything we should be looking at, do please point us in the right direction.
Absolutely.
we
We're
love
always
that too.
interested in films and new technology or something that we've missed. I mean, we can't possibly include everything that we've come across in 1 month, so we have to narrow it down. If you give us leads, we'll follow them.
Absolutely. That's it. That's all the feedback that we've got this month. So thanks again.
All right.
Brilliant.
What kind of news do you have for us today?
Oh my God, me.
Yes, you.
I have lots of news again, but I'm going to cut it. Actually, I'm going to
Let's
dice
try
it.
to keep it within reason.
Yeah, absolutely. So
we don't want another hour and 20 minutes.
Indeed, and I could do that on my own, I think, these days. First of all, some really interesting applications of Machinima, and I've got two things I want to talk about. We mentioned some time ago the actor Sam Crane, who's otherwise known as Rustic Mascara on social media, and a motley cast of GTA characters performed what has been described as the first full theatrical performance of a Shakespeare play in GTA Online. This was Hamlet, and it was live streamed on the 4th of July. I was one of those folks out of the game in the audience. I have to say, I think what impressed me most about this endeavor was the way they thought through how to deal with the audience in the game as well as perform the play. No mean feat, I have to say. And there wasn't hundreds of people in there with them, but there was enough that they needed to manage the process. And I think my favorite part was when they moved to another set to perform a scene in an aircraft, which they crashed and killed everyone. It was absolutely hilarious. I think really it was overall it was a really enjoyable event, super interesting to see, and I think also interestingly has since attracted more mainstream media attention too. And what they said was the goal that they had for it, or that Sam had for it, was wanting to bring Shakespeare to a new audience. And I think to an extent they probably have done that, but I think it will be kind of interesting to see how others pick up on this kind of Shakespearean mantle in future also. So I'll be super interested to see how that unfolds.
Well, I'm really glad you attended that, and it sounds like a fascinating event. But I'd like to point out that the novelty of doing Shakespeare and GTA is what attracts people, not the fact that it's Hamlet's
Absolutely.
by William Shakespeare. But if that's a doorway into people suddenly going, well, wow, this is kind of an interesting play, let me go take a look at it, that could be very useful.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that one, Ricky. It was most definitely an odd experience.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of the strolling players or street theater.
Yeah,
that tradition has been around forever, and dealing with unruly audiences has always been part of the experience. I recall reading when I was doing a lot of research on performing Shakespeare, one of the earliest strolling players, Shakespeare players, was in the United States just after the Civil War. And many cities did not like drama or plays because they thought they were immoral. So this one particular company would specialize in being able to bring in a production really fast. And then if the local sheriff or authorities got wind of it, tie everything up no matter where they were, and then leave before they got arrested. And it had the account of somebody, they were doing Othello. And about halfway through, they got the news that the sheriff was on the way. And so one of the characters, so they made the signal, and whatever character was on stage quickly summarized what happened. They did a quick bow and left, all within like 60 seconds. So I thought that, and of course that must have been hilarious for the people watching it. So that tradition is something that they didn't establish, but I'm really glad to see it still exists today.
Yeah. Of course, I question that it's first Shakespearean play to be performed in a virtual environment, because I'm pretty sure that sort of stuff has been going on in Second Life for a very long time.
No. I was in a Shakespeare production that was done in what, IRC chat, and then also in some other virtual reality back in, God, just 1998, something like that. I'd forgotten all the details, so I can't remember it. But no, I don't think they were the first.
No, but it's interesting to talk about it in any event. And I think it's interesting because obviously Sam's a professional actor, and obviously a Shakespearean actor, having played at the Globe and whatnot as well. So he's got all the chops with the performance side of it, but just never actually done it in a game environment that he loves.
Congratulations, and I encourage them to keep doing it. Maybe Macbeth is the next one to do inside of some sort of rough and ready game world,
Yes, exactly.
Ricky, what you're saying about the sheriff coming and shutting down the plays, I'm just thinking in GTA, if one of the actors accidentally did something to set off the police in the in-game NPC police.
That would be good. Then all the cast is running away in cars and the police are chasing them.
Yeah. I mean, what was interesting is they managed all the scenes so that there were no there was no opportunity for people to discover what they were doing and just interrupt it. So they were on a ship, or they were in an area where there was nobody else, or an island, or bits and bobs. So the whole thing was really choreographed to a very high level, I thought. But the way they moved the audience around and told them where to stand whilst they were setting up the scene, really, there was a lot of thought that had gone into the audience management side as well as the actual performance side of it.
That's great.
So yeah, impressive. Secondly, then, nice little article about Unreal Engine 5 having been used to create the set of a music venue as a kind of previs, which I think is a nice twist on the use of game engines used as tools that create set-based backdrops. We've talked about this quite a bit in the past, where Machinima has been used as a previs tool for film, but I think it's really quite interesting to see that that use is being spread across a broader range of entertainment experiences now too. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that. Quite an interesting use, I think.
Yes.
And then I've got a couple of tips, hints, and useful stimuli that you might be interested in.
Okay.
Nice little video featuring Christopher Nolan explaining how he made a series of films with no budget, or low budget. Lots of good ideas in there. It's not specifically about Machinima, of course. It's more about real film. But I've no doubt that the same kind of ideas that he talks about can be applied in a virtual context too. So we'll put a link to that. And an article on the 50 greatest fictional deaths of all time has been published, which purports to cover the most tear-jerking, hilarious, satisfying and shocking scenes from 2,500 years of culture. There are some pretty good ones on the list. If you're looking for inspiration, you could try one or more of those to sort of wet your teeth, rather than try and recreate shot by shot big budget film scenes. That might be a way of sort of stimulating some creative juice. So we'll put a link to that article in there as well.
Sounds fascinating.
It is. You'd enjoy that one, Ricky. And then I've got a few tech tools that you might be interested in. The first one, an AI dubbing service that automates video translation with human sounding voiceovers called Papercup. It's not free, but it still looks pretty interesting, pretty useful from my point of view. So if you're thinking about how you can kind of make your film more accessible to a different audience, or you're, say, creating content in a language that won't necessarily make it more accessible to a wider audience, I think that's a potentially useful tool to have a look at. Then there's a new markerless mocap hand tracking tool in Animate 3D software, which is by DeepMotion. That seems to have been published in June. It's also not free, but there is a kind of a freemium model operating for this. So you can create something up to about, I think it's about 30 seconds long for free. And then depending on what you want to use it for, you know, you can kind of pay increasing amounts to create kind of more content. So if you think that one through, you might be able to get away with a freemium use of it. And an interesting idea, if not an app or indeed a tutorial, a guy has created a set that links Unreal Engine 5 to the orientation data from an Android phone, which allows him to simulate gravity by rotating a monitor. And it's one of those kind of really simple things which could possibly lead to hours and hours of fun. You know, you can tip your screen and the whole set sort of wobbles about, and it's brilliant. Have a look at it, see what you make of it.
I used to imagine someone making a Star Trek-like machinima, and you know the scenes when the bridge starts shaking and the crew goes flying off all over. You could do that just by shaking the screen.
Shaking the screen, yeah.
And you tip it upside down just to see what happens.
yeah. Well, it is pretty interesting what he's done with it. I mean, it's, like I said, it's not a tutorial. It doesn't tell you how he's done it, but it doesn't look that difficult to do, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a fascinating idea. Another one of those kind of creative little things that you might want to play with, I guess.
Thank you.
And that's it for me. That's all my news this month.
You always have such great news. Thanks for putting the effort into coming up with such good stuff. Hey, Damien, what do you have for us today in the way of Machinima news?
I've got a few interesting things.
All right.
So there's the Godot 4 engine, which is a video game engine, a bit like Unity. It's open source and it's free. I don't know too much about it myself, but they've recently just had an update which allows footage from whatever game you've created to be saved as a video file or an image sequence, which is perfect for making machinima, because you can, you don't have to make a game, but if you're using the engine to create your scene, you now got the tools built into it to save the footage, which you can then do whatever you like with whatever editing software you want. And so that's obviously a huge new feature for the engine. And the update itself is free, so it's completely free to try that. But I don't know anything else about the engine, so I can't recommend it. I know it does 2D and 3D, but
I've reviewed it and worked with it a bit, and it's a bit like Blender was before they had their big breakthrough update. It's still in the process. It's community, people were open source driven. But I liked it a lot. I like the attitude. I like the tools. They just never seem to get around to doing much in the way of helping machinima filmmakers. So I'm really glad to see that they brought the capability to create machinima inside of it more easily, because I think it's really an up and coming game engine. It's overshadowed by Unreal and Unity a lot, but I like it. I think the look is really good. More and more people are making games from it. So I encourage people to take a look at it since it's free and start making machinima inside of it.
Yeah. So the next thing is last month we talked about Love, Death and Robots, which is a Netflix animated series. And a few days after that, they released a sort of behind the scenes video of a different episode in the series called In Vaulted Halls Entombed. And it turns out that was animated and rendered entirely in Unreal. And they were attracted to Unreal as a real-time platform and because of the visual quality. So this behind the scenes video, they kind of talk about why they chose it, which I just kind of covered. But they also, it shows the actors in the motion capture suits, and they're in the big studio, and they've got these markers on the floor so that the actors know where to go. And I thought it was interesting to see how real-time animation is being used on this sort of Netflix level. And I watched the actual episode as well because I hadn't seen it before, and it looks really good. I mean, I can see why they wanted to use Unreal. It's visually stunning. It's a bit gory and violent, so if you're a bit sensitive to that, maybe avoid it. But I thought it was really good, and it's it's really well made, and you can see they put a lot of effort into it. And one of the things they talk about in the behind the scenes video is if they didn't have that real time ability to render real time, they would not have been able to make it because they just did not have the time to do rendered with the schedule they were given. So that's the only way they could make this story was to use Unreal.
Fascinating.
That is interesting. Unreal's a game changer, isn't it, really, in many ways?
It sure is. It's a bellwether for real-time filmmaking. I'm surprised there aren't more machinima filmmakers making films inside of Unreal, because it has all of the elements that early machinima communities were crying out for. A marketplace where you could buy materials, characters, and sets. It's free. It's got all of the elements that allow you to animate quickly or mocap quickly. Lip sync is built right into it. I mean, it's just got everything. Plus, you can do styles of rendering. You can do a cartoon style of rendering. You can combine live action with it, with adjusting the render style. So, wow, if you haven't tried out Unreal Engine now and you're listening to this, go over to that place, download it. The community is huge, lots of tutorials, and see what you can make of it.
And it's free as well.
And it's free.
I mean, I've got a theory on that, really. I think they're all busy making tutorials with it at the moment, not putting enough
That's right. You had mentioned that before.
Yeah. I even talked to, when I was talking to John McInnes about it, I was saying that, really, we've got to get these folks off these tutorials and into the creative thing. There needs to be more competitions.
And the stories are great and helpful, but you need to actually make something, not just another tutorial.
Rather than a tutorial. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry, Damien.
Well, sticking with Unreal, we talked all about how the Star Wars TV shows have used Unreal for the Mandalorian and everything to create the virtual sets. But the Star Trek is also using it. The series that just finished, Strange New Worlds, used the virtual set technology to create the alien environments that they beamed down to, but also some of the environments on the ship, like the engine room. They didn't build a whole engine room set. They just had sort of the front bit with some computer terminals, but then everything else behind was all virtual. And it looks stunning. I actually think they did better with it than the Star Wars shows did, because the Star Wars shows have mostly focused on desert planets, which, it's nice to see something different, whereas Strange New Worlds lives up to its name. Each planet looks very different. There's one planet where it's all frozen and there's a crashed ship in the background, and you've got the characters, they beam down and they look around and then they head off to the ship to investigate it. And I think that's a really good use of the technology, and it
sure is.
It looks better than some of the feature films that are still using green screen technology, where you can tell that the actors are in front of a fake environment. It looks kind of like, well, not quite as rough as the picture on my webcam now, but you can tell it's not real. But when you've got this virtual environment, because it's actually there behind the actors as they're there, they blend in a bit better, so it looks more real. Even though they're not really on an alien planet, it looks like they are. And that's really important for a show like this, where you want to believe the characters are there. And I think Strange New Worlds did it really well. Star Trek Discovery has also used this technology, but Strange New Worlds is the first Star Trek show to use it entirely from the beginning, from the first episode. They film it in Toronto, I believe, and they do share the virtual set with Discovery, so they kind of use, and they've only got one of these environments, so they have to take turns using it, which must be quite fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's another way to demonstrate how Unreal and this virtual environment technology has been used. And we've talked about it a lot before, and I think we probably will again as more examples of it come along.
Well, Hollywood production is all about saving money. So the fact that they're shooting in Toronto and not Los Angeles at the Paramount Studios, which is the home of Star Trek, is an indication that they're really into saving a lot of money. And using Unreal is another way to save money too. So I'm glad that that's happening. Disappointed that they're taking jobs away from California workers and giving it to Canadian workers, but that's been a trend that's been going on for a decade now. But Unreal, I think more and more productions are using that, and they're not just doing it on a one episode basis. They're doing, like you say, they're figuring it into their production right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad to see that, because I know Epic is working with production companies and refining Unreal as they come up with new problems that the engine can't solve. And then they have a lot of money and they have a lot of developers and researchers, and they solve that problem and then add it to the game, which is for free, that you can get the benefit from in a year or so. So it's both positive and negatives on that, but I want to emphasize the positives on it. And I think that's great.
Yeah. I mean, just to say also that the next episode of the history part of our podcast that Ben's doing is actually about Unreal and the background to it and how they came to develop the matinee tool that's the background to the current iteration of it.
Fascinating history.
Yeah, you'll really enjoy that, I'm sure.
And the other part of it is also the speed, because it's all rendered in real time. So if you have a green screen and you've got your actors and they perform the scene, they'll perform it. Their performance will be the same speed no matter what the background is. But if you've got the green screen and you're doing rendered backgrounds, you're going to spend sort of months rendering those scenes in the background. Whereas if you've got the environment there, it's there, the footage is complete. If you want to add extra, like laser beams or whatever, you can do that, but you're not having to do the whole environment. And that saves a lot of time, because they actually finished filming season 2 of Strange New Worlds before season 1 had finished being broadcast.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So that gives you an idea of how much speed that's an increase there. And obviously, as a Star Trek fan, that makes me happy, because it means not having to wait quite so long for the next episode now the season's finished. So yeah, and I think another advantage, which I don't think anyone's used just yet, if you've got these virtual environments that are powered by Unreal and you want to make a tie-in video game, you can just take the assets straight from that and put them in the video game, because they're already refined for real-time use.
I'm sure that they figured that into the production.
I have absolutely no doubt. John talked about it. John, when we were talking to John Gazer, he was talking about how you can use the assets in many different ways. So game, film, social media, whatever it is you want to do with it, theatre and all the rest of it, all can be used as a collective suite. So each kind of set of assets becomes like a little business model for its own
so
content production.
So upcoming Star Wars and Star Trek video games are probably going to be using the actual locations and props,
which I think is a good creative idea. Because if you're somebody who enjoyed that series, you're going, oh my God, I'm in that actual space that was in the television series. And I think that's pretty cool.
And if there's something in the background that catches your eye, you can go in the video game and go and have a close look at it. So, oh, that's really fascinating, no matter what it is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know what? I wonder. All I was going to say was, I bet that creates yet another set of IP issues, though, because if you're using the same background and it looks the same as in the film, and these studios are hot on what you can do with the film and how you can use the film in YouTube and all the rest of it, how are you going to be able to use the game content with your own machinima? So that's going to create another minefield for content creators, I think.
You're right. But then again, I'd like to point out that how many lawsuits have we seen or takedown notices? There haven't been that many. So although you're taking a risk, it's not a sure thing that you're going to get your hand slapped if you use that material, especially since the argument can be that you're promoting the material as well, and you give proper credit. So I think it's 50-50 on that one.
Yeah.
I was going to point out that it also does that use of Unreal real-time technology also helps the actors, because unlike previous shows, earlier shows in the television history, you couldn't see exactly where you were or what you were doing. None of the original Star Trek actors knew what things looked like. Maybe they'd get a sketch or a painting, but that's it. But here they can actually look on the monitor and see the world that they're in, and then make adjustments. Oh, it's dark, so I'll have to do this, or it's got this cold thing, so you know what I mean? It gives them more imaginative material to work with. And as an actor, I think that's great. So I think it's helping the actors too.
Yeah, there was a scene in the Battlestar Galactica reboot where you got these two actors and they're kind of huddled together looking up at the sky, because there's one, the Galactica's jumped in, it's dropping out of the sky, so it's one object coming down. But you look at the two actors, they're huddled, they're right next to each other, they're looking in complete opposite directions. Even though they're supposed to be both looking up to see what's going on, they're sort of looking like that.
That's where probably what happened was they had to get that shot super fast, and they got it, and they didn't have time to go back, because a good director would see that in the monitor in the replay.
Yeah.
And they would go, hey, you guys, we need to change the, they'll put a tripod and then put a piece of a card with an X on it.
Yeah.
So people can look, both actors can look at the right place. But I'll guarantee you they did that because they had no time and they had to get that shot.
Yeah, it's a very action-packed episode, so I can see that would probably be a rush to get that done.
Yeah.
Old eagle-eyed Damien spots that.
I loved that sequence so much. I watched it so many times that things like that started popping out to me.
Yeah. So do you have anything else, or?
I got one more thing. It's not quite as cheerful as what we've been covering so far. It's the news that the Unity engine is merging with a company that produces malware.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't really, I haven't really looked too closely at this, but I feel like if you're using Unity to create your machinima, you might want to keep an eye on updates that come, because you might find yourself getting things installed on your computer that you don't want.
Ouch. That's really bad news.
Why would they do that?
I don't know, but there was a big outcry about it.
Because probably Unreal is just squashing them to death in terms of the market. But that's too bad, because Unity has always been a very positive and supportive and growing market. And the only reason I can think of is financing, money.
It's a shame, because I know you've been a champion of Unity for quite a while. So when I saw that, I thought, that's not going to end well if it puts people off using it.
Yep. So if you're using Unity or thinking of using Unity, keep that in mind. Obviously, they're going to use their malware in any product that they take on or any application. So check your updates to make sure and keep an eye out. We'll report on that more in the future. Can you keep an eye on that for us, Damien?
Yeah. Anything else I find out, I will cover in the future.
All right. I just got two short pieces of news. That I wanted to share with him. Both of them are much more positive than the Unity thing. In keeping with the Unreal theme, Epic Games has released an animation field guide. It's a free downloadable 120-page ebook on real-time production, including case studies on the work of Sony Pictures ImageWorks and DNEG Animation. It shows an overview of the differences between real-time production using Unreal Engine and traditional offline rendering pipeline. The bulk of the content is mostly interviews with Unreal users, but still it's a free downloadable. I think it's worth checking out if you're interested in real-time filmmaking, because it'll give you all the basics of how that's done. If you're wondering how the Star Trek people are using it, you can download this thing. We'll give a link for it in our show notes to make sure you can get the download. And I'm really glad they're doing that. The Epic Games has been doing a good job of outreach and support and tutorials. So good for them. And then my last piece of news is an update on Nightmare Puppeteer by the person who was previously known as M. Strange. His real name is Mike. He lives down in Santa Marina. Yeah. And San Jose. Well, it's Northern California. And I'm so glad to see that he's still working on this updates and additions and fixes. It costs 49 cents. And he frequently has sales, so you get a half price. So it's 24 cents in the future. It's really the best buy you can get because it's free. It's a game engine. It allows you to make just crazy and strange and interesting animations. And if you know M. Strange's work, his stuff is very experimental and strange and kooky. And I think he called himself one time the Walt Disney's of weirdos, which I think is a good way to put it. Exactly right. Some of the updates include new modes, new rendering modes, and he's got like 20 or 25 of them, and you can render your entire scene as you're working on something in just absolutely completely strange and wild looks, including traditional stuff, black and white and high noir look. It's just terrific. He's got new FX. He's got new actors that he's added to it. And he also has this fascinating thing that, to my mind, is the best addition. He's always had the ability to put subtitles in your scenes, natural occurring subtitles that will time with the actors speaking, which I thought just could make it wonderful. But what he's done is he's allowed you to be able to do dialogue subtitles that will randomly choose from a bank of text. So, for example, if you wanted to do kooky Shakespeare, you could take a Hamlet speech, put it in the dialogue, and the engine will randomly choose lines and put them together. So you can have this sort of absurdist Shakespeare thing that you can in turn make a scene with. You know what I mean? So you could do your own kooky Shakespeare production. I just want to congratulate Mike for staying with it and working on it and connecting, because the use of the Nightmare engine has fallen off quite a bit since its original production a year and a half ago, and yet he's still working hard on it. You can get this tool, Nightmare Puppeteer, on Steam, as I said, for 49 cents. The new additions are in the experimental branch of it, and it's easy to access the experimental branch. You download it and then you access by using a password, and he gives you the password. So it's very easy to do. That way you can use the experimental branch without screwing up anything that you're working on in the normal branch. You know what I mean? So kudos to Mike for Nightmare Puppeteer. And if you haven't used this and you like strange and unusual and kooky stuff, this is a great tool to use for that. And at 49 cents, it's essentially free. And that's my news.
Great stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for sharing your Machinima news. I'm always fascinated after 20 plus years that we're still having interesting and compelling news about Machinima and Machinima related technologies. That's very encouraging to me. Thank you all for listening. If you have comments on the news or you want to get any downloads on some of the stuff we've done, we'll have them all in the show notes. Also, feedback on stuff that we've talked about, just talk@completethemachinima.com is a way to connect with us. So thank you, Tracy and Damien. That's it for our news segment. We'll be back with our film section in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.